Welcome back to the Radio Academy podcast. I'm your host, Georgy Jamieson, and this week we talk about the US election and how podcasts have handled the run-up to it. These interviews were done at the end of last week as we headed towards the last few days of a long campaign. In a moment, you'll hear from Anne McElvoy, head of audio at POLITICO and host of their Power Play podcast. But first, I spoke to the producer of The Rest is Politics US, Nicole Maslen, and head of content, Tom Whiter from Goalhanger podcasts. I asked Nicole how they aim to keep listeners engaged with the US election when the run-up to it is so long.
Yes, it is. It feels like almost as soon as president is inaugurated, you already have to start thinking about the next one.
Next one, yeah.
And in America, unlike most countries in the world, it really is a 50-50 split always. It does seem to just go either way. Like in the UK, the Conservative Party is far more successful electorally, but in America, it can sort of go either way. So I understand that. But I think that most audiences in the UK are engaged in the US election in a way that they're not about others, because obviously we have a special relationship with America, but also it is an election that is affecting the entire world, and global security is a massive part of that. America has historically been the world's policeman and is engaged in lots of conflicts around the globe. So I think that people are engaged in the result and who is leading that country. But I understand what you mean about the intricacies of it, because those are the parts that are really difficult to get. And I think it's really useful having someone on the ground in America reporting on those things for a UK audience. I think Rory in particular was quite good at that before we started The Rest is Politics US, because his wife is American. He spends a lot of time there. He teaches at Yale. So he was able to sort of simplify it and explain those things like Super Tuesday or what delegate is, and the things that the lexicon that we don't use here in the UK.
The whole college system, their voting process to us seems extraordinary.
And extraordinary that you don't know the winner on the day after the election. It can take so long.
Tom, as head of content, you're running the production team. So tell me a little bit about your job.
It's lots of different things going on at the same time, trying to keep everybody moving. So I'm primarily running the production team and making sure that each podcast has got the right team behind it and everyone's putting out their episodes when they should do. But also it's trying to connect those podcasts into the rest of the business. So it's about making sure that the commercial deals that our team strikes for all the adverts that we do make sense in terms of the content. And also just helping do a bit more big picture thinking about where's the company going to be in 1 to 5 years' time? Who do we need to be within the company at that point? What should our priorities be? And helping sort of put into action what Jack and Tony, our founders and MDs, want to happen in the company.
And how much do you, within your role, how much do you have a say in what Rory and Alastair are talking about, or is that more you, Nicole, in terms of the topics that they talk about in each of the podcasts?
I would say it's kind of both and neither of us at the same time. I'd say that Rory and Alastair actually are really proactive as hosts, and they're not just broadcasters there to read all our notes. They are really proactive in picking topics, and we have a production team chat with all of us where Tom, myself, the other producers, and Rory and Alastair as well will send topics and articles throughout the weekend, articles in the Sunday newspapers, interviews, and then kind of collectively decide what the 3 or 4 main topics will be that week. And sometimes it's a bit of a debate because we want to talk about everything, but we can't talk about everything. So
how are you preparing for the election day itself in terms of what content you're going to put out as soon as we start to get those results coming in?
It's really exciting, isn't it? I think it's been marked on our calendar November the 5th since we started the new year, really. And the challenge we've set the team, I think, is how do we get that coverage? How do we do the explainers? How do we deliver as many episodes as we can without overloading people? I think where Nicole and the team have been fantastic in the run-up to it is We've obviously launched Versus Politics US. As we did with the UK election, we've started just to up the frequency of episodes to match as the news pace develops, that we're covering every story when we need to. And ahead of the US election, we really thought as both podcasts, we wanted to do something really special. And Alistair and Rory did such a good job on Channel 4 on election night, and we really enjoyed working with the team there, that we thought, well, I wonder if we can do our own election night broadcast ourselves. And so that's where I think the broadcasting the Rest is Politics live on election night from New York, initially streamed to YouTube, but then being cut down into podcasts to put out on the regular RSS feeds as well. It's going to be a really exciting night. And we're going to sort of take 3 bites at the cherry. We're going to do a sort of warm-up show that'll be on in the afternoon in America. So it's UK time will be 8 p.m. till midnight. And then we can sort of add the layers of context and give some initial impressions about what's going on. Then we'll be back on 5 a.m. till 9 a.m. where we'll be able to bring some of the results through and some of the initial analysis about what's going on. And then later in the day on the 6th of November, having a look at sort of a 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. stop, where we're hoping that's the point at which Pennsylvania will be announced. If the sort of early predictions are right, we might have a new president at that point.
Nicole, I mean, that's a very ambitious project, isn't it? Tell me about your involvement as the producer in getting that out over a 24-hour period.
It's very much a team effort. There's going to be quite a lot of us there in New York, and it's also a team effort with the broadcasters. I think for such a long time, a long period, having just 2 people was never going to be viable, and also you need a breadth of knowledge. Part of my role has been finding guests that we can use, especially American guests and their expertise, but also a few people who are Brits in America, experts on polling, on elections themselves, people who can explain to us what the Electoral College is about, as we mentioned earlier.
That's the bit I don't understand at all.
And honestly, it takes a while to get your head around all these different intricacies. So a big part of it was just getting a really good team on the panel, some people joining us via Zoom, and then just the practicalities of it. As Tom said, this is all available on YouTube. If you search on YouTube, US election live stream, it's there and it's running live. But every 2 hours, we're able to pull the audio from the first 2 hours. And we have a team back in London who are going to be ripping that audio and putting it out as our podcast on the RSS feed. So just many, many people helping, making it possible. And I think, it will work wonderfully.
It's been a conceptual challenge as well, hasn't it? Because, we aren't going to try and do the sort of broadcast that you would get on the BBC, or if you're in the States on CNN or Fox News. We aren't going to be able to bring you sort of on the ground coverage from, each one of the 50 states with up to the minute vote counts or things like that. So we really wanted to play to our own strengths on it. So it's going to be more like what you'd expect from the podcasts, but highly tuned for a live stream. So we're going to have lots of fantastic graphics with the overlays. We're going to be bringing the best bits of the podcasts that we know the listeners enjoy. So question time will be in there. We'll be bringing in the guests that Nicole's been booking as almost like mini leading episodes within the broadcasts, as well as all the sort of commentary and analysis. So we were talking about it is we want to be, if you think about got your friends around for a dinner party and there's the election broadcast going on in the corner, we want to be the dinner party. We don't want to be the broadcast in the corner. We really think that people are going to have us on maybe second screen whilst they've got a bigger results night going on. But, it's on YouTube, so you can get it on your big telly as well.
When we talked about the UK election on the Radio Academy podcast, we talked about how radio dealt with that overnight and getting those results in and having a team working overnight and in the wee small hours of the morning. With the US election, I wanted to talk about how podcasts are dealing with it. And I think that the concept that you've got going on there is really pushing the boundaries of how you're mixing podcasts that people can access whenever they like and something that's going on live as well, but isn't linear radio. It's a big project, but it's an exciting one. I don't know of anyone else that's doing it this way. Who came up with this concept?
I think after the election in the UK, where we worked very closely with Channel 4 in the run up to it. So every week I was at ITN doing a video version of our normal broadcast to go out on Channel 4. And then that was obviously part of Rory and Alistair being there on election night as well. And that looked so good, and we knew they'd be doing something similar again. But I think it was Tony, our CEO, who was like, we should do this with all of our other amazing hosts who have loads of interesting things to say. Like Marina Hyde is a part of it, and she's such a wonderful political journalist as well as a cultural one. And Dominic Sandbrook with his historical knowledge, and especially of American history. So it was like, we've got all these amazing people at our disposal. Let's make our own panel. It would be brilliant.
There are a lot of political podcasts out there. How do you try and make things different so that you stand out from all the others? How do you wade through, particularly with US politics, the fake news, the TV debates, the barracking of insults between the candidates? How do you get to the heart of what your listeners really want to hear?
Well, I think all those things you mentioned may be questionable for democracy, but it gives no shortage of content when you're making podcasts about politics. I have to be honest.
It's all great content, but it's not necessarily factually true. But I guess your listeners are intelligent enough and politically aware enough to fight through that. But how do you, as producers, fight through that?
Yes, I think it is difficult with the fake news thing in America. I think, again, specifically with American politics. But I think with our hosts, it's really great because with Rory and Alistair, they're so, evangelical about populism and fake news and really understand it and wade through it as a sort of philosophy. So that doesn't worry us so much. And I think in America, with the US hosts, Catty and Anthony as well, are just so well connected in politics over there. They know so many people. Catty previously and still actually works for the BBC in America, so is really, I think, good at showing both sides and being balanced. Anthony is now speaking for the other side, but has worked and been at the heart of the Trump campaign and presidency. So we kind of strive to have balance in all of our podcast hosts, and that really helps.
Thank you to Nicole and Tom, and it's fascinating to hear how Goalhanger are pushing the boundaries of what podcasting can do. Next, I caught up with Anne McElvoy, head of audio at Politico and host of their political podcast Power Play. I asked Anne to outline what Power Play is all about.
So Politico's Power Play podcast is a weekly interview show. And what we wanted to do with it when I joined Politico, which is getting on for a couple of years ago, but we launched really in the middle of last year, was to bridge the Atlantic with the kind of conversations that we thought people who are interested in what's happening in UK politics, policy, big decisions, the kind of power brokers would be interested in if they were the people who take a plane for business or pleasure from the US to UK, and vice versa as well in this extraordinary election year and everything that's at stake. You've almost got like a second string of listeners and readers of Politico in the UK who, if they go out in the evening, they're talking to their mates, are as likely to talk about the state of the US race as they are to talk about what's happening in Westminster or in the budget or in a leadership race. And then we do also look at the other European capitals when we feel it's a big enough topic and there's enough meat on the bone for people to be very interested in what's happening. So it could be a very significant election or just something where we just got an amazing guest. We had the Prime Minister of Greece, for instance, on the migration crisis, and that seemed to speak to concerns in Greece, in Britain and in America. So that kind of guest who covers the waterfront.
So is that what you do when you're thinking about how to talk to a predominantly UK market about US politics? And how does that differ to discussing UK politics when you're thinking about your listeners?
Well, when you think about the listeners, and if you imagine them, they are in pools. I mean, there's a big chunk of them, a really big chunk of them in the US. So it's not predominantly actually for a British audience. When we do UK politicians, I would say, for instance, talking a recent interview, which made a lot of news with John Healey, the Defence Secretary, saying the British Army wasn't in a fit state to fight in a war. And that was massively picked up. I mean, counting 12, 13, 15 plus big destinations of other newspapers and broadcasters who followed that on the day and into the weekend beyond, including the Times of London's top leader. There, I would say you're right. You know, that's a story that's going to resonate more in the UK, and we just lean into that. If I'm talking to, say, Kevin McCarthy when he had just been pretty much kind of ousted in Congress as Speaker, but he was and is still very much in the Donald Trump penumbra, may even end up with a senior position in the event of a Trump administration. I'm probably aware that for my Politico colleagues in DC, they don't need to be told so much about like what he did before. But if you hear people will go, yeah, I can't recognize that guy. I've seen him, and then I saw that there was some big news story, but it was in the corner of my eye and I missed it. And what's that got to do with Donald Trump? So maybe I would ask slightly more, I always call them the Mrs. Merton questions, the sort of on the nose, quite obvious questions. But I'm not very apologetic about that, because sometimes they are questions that after a while senior politicians don't get asked so much, like, can Britain fight a war? Or are you going to come back and run Donald Trump's campaign? Sometimes genuinely naive and don't know. And sometimes I'm not quite so naive and I think I might know.
Welcome to Power Play from Politico, where we talk to some of the world's most influential people on both sides of the Atlantic. My guest is a local, Kevin McCarthy. He made history by being the first Speaker of the House of Representatives to be unceremoniously ousted during a legislative session last October. As the race for the White House now warms up, might he make a return to the front line? And how does he really feel about that highly public downfall? Kevin McCarthy, welcome to Power Play.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
It's your first time at Milken since you stepped down from Congress at the end of last year, so you're mingling with luminaries from both sides of the Atlantic. You must miss the Washington fray, particularly in the way that you were forced to depart it.
Well, look, I miss a big part of it. There's some people I don't miss at all.
We have time constraint. We edit tightly, but we're not just trying to beat everyone else to a particular day's newsline. We can go that bit deeper, and sometimes you get a really revealing answer to that kind of question that you maybe didn't expect.
How do you feel that podcasts, just in general, and Politico, obviously in the forefront of your mind, have dealt with the lead up to the US election? Because I think to the UK markets, a lead up to a US election is extraordinarily long.
All right, in some ways it can feel very long because it's very intense. But if you're looking at it in the lens of eternity, this was within a few weeks that we moved over from talking about whether Joe Biden could hang on as the candidate to, whoops, he's gone, all right, here comes the next one. So America is also very pacey in that way. And I think that's good for podcasting, in the sense podcasting likes the new and the curious. There's certainly different markets within it. I would say I sit in that space of being open, curious, but well-informed. I've been a journalist across foreign affairs since the fall of the Berlin Wall, so I can't really hide my age because I covered that. It was my first big outing, war correspondent in the Balkans, Russia. I've seen the interplay of American power over a number of decades. And I think you're right to say podcasting has a particular opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is, I think you've got a lot of podcasts fighting in the space of, I don't believe what Donald Trump's just said, or is Kamala Harris terrible, or isn't that a lackluster campaign? And then talking more and more about their views on something where the audience is very familiar with where they're coming from, left or right. Podcasting audiences, I would say, in this space lean a bit more leftwards, or not even, crazy left, but towards the centre left by demographic, etc. But as you can see by Donald Trump using the bro podcasters with a young male audience, there is also an audience on the right that has evolved. And I think it is a challenge, is if you're going to do more clarifying material. I think we do very well in this incarnation what a lot of people are saying they would miss, for instance, with BBC's Hard Talk going shortly, where for whatever reason, right or wrongly, the main national broadcaster said, well, we're not going to do that sit down recorded interview format for television. We can't make it work commercially, whatever their reasons. I don't see us as just doing the same thing, because I think podcasting has a different vibe, a different intimacy. It's a bit more irreverent. Even when we're serious, I will tease people. I will tease people who are very powerful. And I think perhaps in a television interview, that might come across a bit oddly. And I think in a podcast, you can get away with it. So I think there is something there where you're still bringing a lot of information, but we don't really want to. And it wouldn't be, I think, our strength or intention to play in the space of quite partisan people who feel very strongly, for good or bad reasons, what they already believe. I think we're there for people who want to know how the politics happen. Power Play is the name of the podcast for a very good reason. It's about how do you get the power that you've got? What are you doing with it now? Who's challenging your power? And how's that power changed since you started to wield it?
This particular US election campaign, somewhat crowded with incidents. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Have I seen anything like this before? I mean, not in the democratic world, because I spent a lot of my time in the former Soviet bloc. So, of course, crazy stuff happened all the time. But if you say, had I foreseen the sort of Trump's out, he's back, Joe Biden's going to be the candidate, no, he's not.
Yeah.
And
assassination attempts.
The assassination. I mean, you're right. You actually start to miss out bits of very important things because it's been so forlorn. Also, I mean, very concerning for me as a former Russia and Ukraine correspondent, what it means for the war, the fact that the story can change week to week on whether, particularly in Donald Trump's case, what he would actually do or would do if he gets elected. That I think that switchback feeling has been very intense. And we haven't really touched on British politics, which of course plays into this as well. I've interviewed Keir Starmer, I've interviewed Rishi Sunak. So sometimes you got the sense, you start thing where you think, I can juggle two balls, and then someone goes, if you do it right, you can put a third one in. And then there are about five going on at once, and the world's and they're terrible at times place, and you have some things like the Southport attacks, the riots in Britain that came off the back of that. Our American audience is utterly fascinated by that.
Were they? That's interesting.
Absolutely fascinated by that. So I'm just aware that sometimes in the audience, we think, what are we going to get out of this particular interview? But the audience is often bringing a lot of curiosity to it about broader trends. I think the what does this mean question, while often frankly unanswerable, is a good one to bear in mind, because you maybe just hear something or become aware of something you didn't know before. And if I leave, as with all my years of being in this soup, thinking, I know that, or I see that a bit differently because of something that somebody said, that would also be, I think, our audiences, brilliant audiences, people I have with my colleagues call it the curiosity gap, and I've lent into this new trendy language. But there's something true about that. If you can make the most of people's natural curiosity and widen the gap, and then find the content. To me, I suppose when I started podcasting, I just thought I'm going to ask people questions like I do in a linear interview, but I think they're right about that, and the way that we conceive of podcasts and titling very differently as a result.
A big thank you to Anne McElvoy. Podcasting likes the new and the curious is now my new best favourite expression. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your pods so you never miss an episode. We really appreciate your support. Our RAMP mentor scheme for mid-career professionals closes on the 7th of November. So if you're wanting to apply, don't hang around. Go to the website radioacademy.org/mentoring for all the details and the application form. And if you wonder whether it's for you, then you can listen to last week's podcast recorded at our webinar with myself and some other past RAMP mentees. I'll see you next week.